So I just had a really weird experience where I was flying around in my brain a bit. So I've done this before. It started about 4 years ago. Before that, I would just see blackness. Sometimes I astral project and stay inside my head. Now this time I was pretty sure that I was in the pineal gland, so I didn't know much about the brain until afterwards. For instance, I didn't know what the pineal gland was, and I didn't know that the cerebral cortex was right next to it, practically touching it. I didn't know that the occipital lobe was back here and was responsible for visual processing. I thought that that was up front here, so this experience is, fairly accurate. Other than the pocket here, I perceived that to be much bigger. So what happened was I was looking left and moving right. It's kind of like walking backwards but looking forwards. And I do this through matter like this, more dense matter, because I can feel the matter before it comes into view. It makes the percepts a lot more comfortable. You don't get overwhelmed by things, especially in this case because I was highly in phase with physical matter. Nothing looked sparkly or anything like that. I was actually seeing everything as it was, and it was pretty gross, I must admit. Like the insides of the brain, while in phase with it slightly, it's all slimy. And I saw the colors correctly too, which is really weird because there's obviously no light in there. I don't really know how I was seeing the colors correctly, like pretty much like this here, this diagram. So I started at the pineal gland somewhere around here, and I started to move backwards onto this section. Now I used to think that awareness was centered around the hypothalamus, which is like right around here, because I always felt that awareness was closer to the eyes whenever I was sitting in my head in darkness. But this percept is like way more valuable than the multiple darkness percepts, because I used to think I knew where, or had a good idea where awareness was or just before I astral projected. But it seems that awareness is indeed centered around the pineal gland along with the astral body when you're in your head, because that's the traditional idea, the traditional belief accompanying astral projection. So what happened was I backed out of this thing into an area here with less dense material in it, possibly just some sort of fluid separating the pineal gland from the cerebral cortex. And I was in there and I was just looking around. Like I sat in that area for a while trying to decide where to go, and I looked at the pineal gland. It was just this red ball thing, reddish brownish ball, and it had two flaps on one side, like the top or bottom. I didn't really know what was top or bottom, but on one edge there's these flaps that kind of came up around the gland a bit, and I think that's what this was. Just came up around the edges a bit, and I looked over at the cerebral cortex. I knew intuitively that it was the cerebral cortex. I'm not sure how I knew. Possibly there was a little indentation or crease that I could see, but I'm not sure. And I decided to fly through the cerebral cortex, so I was moving right and looking right at the same time. And I got to a point where a voice, my voice, like my higher self voice, told me that I was in the visual processing area of my brain, which I had little idea about prior to the experience. And I flew out into the occipital lobe, apparently, because that's responsible for visual processing. And I had this voice go off, and I tried to travel through it. But what happened was I got a feedback loop the more I traveled into it. So what the feedback loop was, what I believe it was me observing the activity in the occipital lobe, and that activity being visually downloaded to the physical body in real time and causing more activity to occur in the occipital lobe. And I would observe that activity again, and it would just keep multiplying like that. I believe that might actually be how vibrations are felt, and how the buzzing sound is felt is from these feedback loops that occur when you try to move awareness out of the brain with spatial movement. So the traditional idea is that the vibrations or buzzing are a subjective interpretation of non-physical energies, but this is actually a pretty valid theory from what I can tell. So apparently you can get other feedback loops if you move awareness through, say, the temporal lobe, you might get the feedback loop where you get the buzzing sound because the temporal lobe is responsible for auditory perception. And I noticed from personal experience and a bit from reading other people's experiences is that the very slow going, physically abstracting projection techniques like the rope technique, for instance, they cause heavy vibrations because you're slowly moving awareness through parts of your brain, according to this theory. Then there's other techniques that are less abstracting. They're a bit harder to learn, but they're going to cause less vibration because you're more aggressively trying to move awareness through these regions instead of slowly. And then there's the techniques that involve actually projecting consciousness immediately to a specific location, which the astral body can facilitate just fine. For instance, you can do this in lucid dreams. And there's one technique where you would go into like a different room in your house and like touch everything and become familiar with everything and really feel up that location. And then you go to have your experience like in a fully conscious state. You would want to really feel yourself back in that location again, and that would cause awareness in your astral body to jump to that location, and you would be back to where you were before, just in your astral body. And those are examples of jumping consciousness and the astral body to different locations without spatially moving it through the brain, and those are the ones that don't have the accompanying vibrations or buzzing sound. This feedback loop can also explain how awareness sits so well in the brain, like how it doesn't really go off in different places and how it locks us into the physical body mercilessly. Anyways, that's it. See ya.